if you feel like your organization is just, well, drowning in information these days, you're definitely not alone. Our sources for this deep dive, they really highlight the scale of this thing. We're talking an estimated 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day, globally. That amount of data, it's less like insight and more like this huge chaotic force we're all trying to somehow manage.
That's exactly right. I mean, once you hit that kind of volume, the raw information itself, it stops being useful guidance. It just becomes noise. So the biggest strategic challenge now, it isn't really getting the data anymore. It's filtering it, focusing it.
And that's precisely what we want to help you with today. This is about, finding the shortcut, understanding how organizations take that massive churning flood of data and turn it into something clear, something actionable, strategic knowledge. We're trying to move past just hoarding data and really get into strategic measurement.
We're talking about mastering business metrics. You probably know them as key performance indicators or KPIs. These are the quantifiable measures that are just essential for making informed decisions, for staying competitive. They're basically the language you need to speak if you want to be a truly data-driven organization.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. What's the actual difference between just measuring something like, say, website traffic and having a real valuable metric?
Well, a true metric, it's always quantifiable, yes. But the key thing is it measures performance against the specific strategic objective you've already defined. The sources we looked at really emphasize that for a complete picture, you need to organize these metrics, usually into three main sort of interconnected categories.
Right. Can you walk us through those three pillars?
Sure. First up, you've got your financial metrics. These are the classics, right? Return on investment, ROI, profit margins, costs. They answer that fundamental question. Are we actually making money? Second, there are operational metrics. These focus inward on how the business actually runs, efficiency, internal processes, speed. A good example here might be production cycle time, or maybe how fast you fulfill orders.
And that third category, that one seems to have just exploded in importance lately.
It really has.
Yeah.
Customer metrics. These are non-negotiable now. This covers everything from, say, customer retention rate, churn rate, that's how many users you're losing, all the way to things like customer lifetime value, or CLV. You see, these three categories, when you put them together, they give you the diagnostic tools. They help you understand every critical part of the business, not just, the bank balance.
But the real kicker here, the value proposition, it's how having these defined metrics fundamentally changes how we look at the past and, maybe more importantly, how we approach the future. It moves us up a ladder, analytically speaking.
It absolutely does. Once you've got reliable KPIs set up, you can move beyond just descriptive analysis, which is basically describing what already happened last quarter. You unlock the power to do predictive analysis, forecasting, future trends based on those very metrics. And, crucially, prescriptive analysis.
Okay, prescriptive analysis.
Yeah.
That term gets thrown around quite a bit. For someone listening, how should they understand what that means in practice?
Okay, think of it like this. Descriptive analysis is like telling a patient you had a fever last week. Predictive analysis is saying, okay, based on your activity, you'll probably get that fever again next month if things don't change. Prescriptive analysis, though, that's the system actually recommending a specific action. It's the automated advice saying, reduce activity X by 30% and take medication Y. It uses those established KPIs to generate automated, actionable advice that directly shapes, or tries to shape, the future actions of the business.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. We've established data is everywhere, collecting it is easier than ever. So the real challenge isn't collection, it's selection. It's choosing the right things to measure. Organizations often get tempted, right? Measure hundreds of things just because they can. But our sources really hammer this point. Metric overload can be incredibly damaging.
Absolutely. The core strategic rule here is pretty clear. An effective data strategy has to start with identifying KPIs that are fundamentally aligned with your core business goals. It can't start with the technology you happen to have access to. If your fancy new analytics tool dictates what you measure, you run a huge risk. The risk of achieving what the sources call useless accuracy, perfectly measuring something that just doesn't matter to your strategy.
So, strategic alignment. That's the name of the game. You have to begin by asking, what's the one thing, or maybe the few things, that really move the needle for us this year? Like, if the company's big objective is aggressive market growth, maybe your number one KPI needs to be market share growth rate, not just, say, total revenue. Or if you're in a mature market and the goal is efficiency, maybe you obsess over reducing the cost of goods sold.
Exactly. And, many people know the SMART framework: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and temporal for goal setting. But the sources offer a kind of interesting twist on it. We don't need to rehash the whole framework, but the way it's applied here is as a validation tool specifically for the metrics themselves. It helps ensure the metrics act like concrete milestones towards those bigger goals.
But I wonder, is a framework like SMART maybe a bit too rigid for today's world? This super fast, agile digital environment. Does focusing too hard on achievable or setting strict temporal boundaries risk making a metric outdated almost instantly if the market shifts?
That's a really good point, and it's a genuine challenge, especially in fast-moving sectors like tech or digital marketing. But the sources seem to argue that when you apply SMART to metrics, it's less about rigid, fixed targets and more about instilling discipline. It forces organizations to clearly define not just what they're measuring, but crucially, how often they'll check if that metric is still the most relevant signal. Is it still telling us what we need to know? So it becomes more of a mechanism for continuous alignment check-ins. It imposes discipline, rather than letting that initial excitement about data lead to chaos.
Okay, let's make this more concrete. Give us some examples across different sectors. Digital marketing, for instance. The KPIs there have a pretty direct link to the bottom line, right?
Oh, absolutely. In digital marketing, you're looking at optimizing campaigns using things like cost per acquisition CPA. How much does it cost to get one new customer? And understanding conversion rates. What percentage of people who click actually buy something or sign up, down to the penny, ideally.
And the focus can shift subtly depending on the area. What about, say, product analytics?
Right. In product analytics, you might measure something like the engagement rate, how much people are using your app or feature. But sometimes that only tells part of the story. Often, the truly strategic metric there is the churn rate. Because a high churn rate, even with good initial engagement, it points to a deeper, maybe structural problem. It suggests the product market fit isn't quite right. That's why those customer metrics have become so central. They expose fundamental issues.
It's also important, I think, to stress this isn't just for businesses selling things. Our sources pointed out some key non-commercial uses, too.
Definitely. A university, for example, isn't selling in the same way, but they absolutely track KPIs. Things like graduation rates are critical KPIs measuring their core objective, educational success. Or in healthcare, patient recovery rates. That's a vital metric for understanding how effective their treatments and processes are. The underlying principle, it really is universal.
So once you've actually selected the right strategically aligned metrics, what's next? How do you build the machinery to actually capture, clean, and use them effectively?
Right, that's the implementation piece. It generally follows a structured cyclical path. Think of it in 3 main steps. Step 1 is data collection. And here, the focus has to be intensely on quality and accessibility. It's not just about volume anymore. We actually need to start measuring the precision of the data itself. If your data quality is only 90% accurate, you have to accept a 10% uncertainty in every decision based on it.
And that's where the whole idea of rigorous data governance becomes so critical, isn't it? Because if the collection is flawed, everything else is built on shaky ground.
Precisely. Data governance isn't just IT jargon. It's the framework, the rules, the enforcement that you put in place to make sure data quality stays high and doesn't degrade over time. Think of it like, the constitutional law for your information pipeline. It ensures every piece of data is reliable and used consistently across the organization.
Okay, so data's collected, it's clean, it's governed. What's step 2?
Step 2 is analysis. This is where you apply more advanced techniques to actually interpret the metrics you're collecting. We're talking about statistical methods, maybe regression analysis to find causal links and predict outcomes, or perhaps clustering to automatically group similar customers or identify patterns. These techniques are what transform those raw metric numbers into predictive models and deeper insights.
And then the third step, this is probably the most visible part for many people in the organization, visualization.
Right. You need dashboards. You need continuous monitoring. Tools like Tableau, Power BI, even Google Analytics dashboards can work. The key here isn't just making pretty charts. It's enabling rapid response. If a critical operational metric suddenly dips below its target, the manager responsible needs to see that almost instantly. They should be able to react in minutes or hours, not find out about it in a report weeks later.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. How do things like big data processing and, artificial intelligence fit into this picture with traditional KPIs? Are they replacing them?
That's a great question. Generally, no, they're not replacing them. They're fundamentally augmenting them, enhancing them. AI and machine learning, or ML, they don't necessarily invent brand new types of KPIs out of thin air. What they do is dramatically improve the speed, the scale, and the sophistication of the entire measurement and analysis system.
How so? In what specific ways do they augment?
Well, for one, ML can handle dynamism much better. Traditional KPIs are often static, right? We set a goal, achieve 15% growth this year. ML, on the other hand, can enable dynamic goal setting. It can suggest optimal targets that actually shift based on real-time market conditions or internal performance. Plus, AI is incredibly good at real-time anomaly detection, spotting weird fluctuations in metrics that a human analyst might miss entirely or only catch much later. It acts like a hyper-vigilant watchdog for your business processes.
The sources also mentioned a really fascinating hidden metric that AI can help generate, something that tells a much deeper strategic story than just operational numbers. What was that about?
Yeah, that was interesting. What the advanced insights they touched on is measuring the actual number of decisions within the organization that are demonstrably based on data.
Yeah.
Then tracking the success rate of those specific decisions, this kind of hidden metric, it's strategically powerful because it shifts the focus. You're not just measuring process execution anymore. You're validating the intelligence layer itself. So you aren't just tracking, say, the churn rate. You're measuring how effectively your team used the churn rate data to make better decisions that actually reduce churn.
Wow, that's profound. It's like measuring the organization's intelligence adoption rate or its decision-making metabolism.
Exactly. And this applies across the board. Take manufacturing. We look at a crucial KPI like machinery downtime. But now you augment that with AI-driven predictive maintenance models. These models recommend servicing before the machine breaks down, directly impacting that KPI. Or think about broader business processes. We use metrics around efficiency and quality like, say, measuring the average time it takes to resolve a customer query from start to finish to pinpoint friction points for immediate improvement.
Okay, now we have to be realistic. Implementing a truly robust metric strategy, it's rarely a smooth ride. So what are the big, critical organizational challenges that usually get in the way of achieving this kind of data mastery?
Yeah, realism is important here. Our sources point to about 4 major obstacles that really need proactive management. The first one, and it's foundational, is data quality. We've touched on it, but it's worth hitting again. Inaccurate or inconsistent data. It just leads to bias analysis, faulty conclusions. It erodes trust in the whole system. The only real solution is that robust data governance we talked about. And it has to be treated as a strategic priority, led from the top, not just, an IT department task.
Challenge number 2 is often the stickiest, the human element. Resistance to change. You can build the most amazing dashboard, but if people ignore it or actively work around it.
That's where so many initiatives fall down. Employees, sometimes especially middle managers, can resist these new, often very transparent measurement systems. They might feel threatened or micromanaged. Overcoming this takes real leadership, clearly articulating the why, how this data helps them do their jobs better. And it needs to be backed up with proper practical training. You've got to sell the benefit, not just mandate the tool.
And the third challenge circles back to that initial problem we discussed. The sheer abundance of data leads to metric overload, that temptation to track absolutely everything.
Right. If you try to monitor too many metrics, you just dilute everyone's focus. You create analysis paralysis where nothing actually gets done because everyone's overwhelmed. Prioritization isn't a one-time thing. It's constant work. You have to continually refine your list down to the vital few KPIs that are truly aligned with your current strategic objectives. And you need to be ruthless about retiring metrics that are no longer serving that core strategy.
And finally, the sources brought up something absolutely critical in today's world, which is the inherent risk of ethical bias creeping into these systems. This needs careful thought.
It absolutely does. This is a huge responsibility. The core issue here is data hygiene, but with an ethical lens. Predictive analyses, especially those powered by machine learning, they're only as fair or unbiased as the data they learn from. So if your historical data reflects societal biases, maybe in hiring practices or loan approvals or even healthcare diagnoses, the algorithm, if you're not careful, will learn and perpetuate those inequalities. Sometimes it even amplifies them. This means we need a proactive, ethical data science approach. It involves actively looking for and mitigating bias, maybe by scrubbing or balancing data sets before you train models. Ensuring fairness is a design principle, not an afterthought.
So tackling these challenges, the data quality, the human resistance, the potential overload, and these serious ethical considerations, it really demands a joined-up approach, doesn't it?
It really does. It requires a holistic solution. You need the right technology, yes, but you also need engaged people with the right skills and mindset. And you need well-defined, streamlined processes connecting everything. If any one of those 3 legs, tech, people, process is weak, the whole strategy will likely stumble and fail to deliver truly actionable insight.
Okay, so what does this all mean then? We've journeyed from the data deluge through strategic selection, implementation mechanics, and tackled the big hurdles. Where does this leave us?
Well, it means that mastering your metrics, it genuinely transforms data. It stops being just a backward-looking record and becomes fuel for actionable outcomes. It directly drives efficiency, boosts profitability, and ultimately helps ensure the organization can sustain itself and grow. This mastery fundamentally changes the conversation inside the business. You move from simply reporting on what happened yesterday to actively designing the outcomes you want tomorrow.
Which leads us nicely to our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. Our sources really conclude with this rather powerful idea. Getting effective domain over your metrics. It doesn't just let you measure the past more accurately. It actually gives you the power, the potential to predict and actively mold the future of your entire enterprise. And that knowledge, that capability, that's what truly shifts an organization's focus. From being merely a historian of its own past performance to becoming the architect of its future competitive destiny,